Yeah.
So hopefully you're all nicely fed and watered after lunch. Yeah. So for those people here that don't actually know me, my name's Andy Pearce. I've been at VMware, Broadcom, whatever, for 10 years. I work really closely with Rich, who's sitting in the corner. So both of us are sort of like VCF specialists around the network and security portfolio of VMware and Broadcom. So one product that we're sort of like responsible for is HCX. And I know some of you I've had discussions with around HCX, but probably HCX is a product that is not very widely known within the VMware ecosystem. And one of the reasons for that is because historically, even before Broadcom, to get HCX, you needed to get, even if you like that, the basic license entitlement of HCX, you needed to buy the most expensive version of NSX to get the lowest tier of HCX. And then you had another license on top of that to get the enterprise tier. And so that was quite expensive. As your VCF, if you purchase VCF via the subscription, you get the enterprise tier of HCX included, right? If you use OVH and you use VCF, and you bring your own licenses to them, you're entitled to use HCX to migrate your workloads from on-prem into their cloud, right? But also because you bring the service, if you want to migrate from VMware Cloud on AWS or GCVE or Oracle Cloud or whatever, to OVH, you can use HCX to migrate from those two different environments. HCX gives you the ability to move workloads, and I'll go into it in a bit more detail, but HCX is not a tool to migrate one or two VMs. It's a tool to migrate, to do mass migrations. And realistically, what do I classify as mass migrations? I'm going to say, if you need to move 150 VMs or more, that should, HCX is a tool. If you need to move one or two VMs, just create a vMotion copy, back them up, etc. Okay. Just as a show of hands, who's actually heard of HCX before? Okay, right, okay. So who's heard of a product that it's had different iterations? So I'm going to call it by its old name, SOM, and it's still created. So Site Recovery Manager. Has everyone heard of Site Recovery Manager? Yeah. Okay. Right. So if I go back a number of years, HCX and SOM, they had an overlap. Okay. Right. And that overlap is that SOM said, okay, we can do migrations, and HCX says, okay, we can provide some disaster recovery. Okay. Going forward, the two products have got a very distinct strategy going forward. So SOM is going to focus purely on that disaster recovery, disaster avoidance use case. Okay. You need to pay extra for SOM. It's an add-on. Okay. HCX is included in the VCF bundle, and it is about migrating workloads, and moving workloads, okay? And that's what it's going to be, and that's its focus going forward. Okay, so what are the use cases and what's the value added benefit of HCX? Okay, so if you think about, okay, I need to do an upgrade, I'm going from vSphere 8 to 9, or I want to move from GCVE to OVH. I want to move, consolidate. I've got 10 data centers. I want to consolidate that down to 3 data centers. I've got a data center that's housed in, I don't know, Global Switch 1, and I need to migrate out of Global Switch, and I need to move those workloads out of there. HCX provides the ability to do those data center migrations, data center consolidations, move the workloads. Like, we have a customer that uses HCX to do rolling upgrades. Okay, so they've gone from VCF3 to VCF4, VCF4 to VCF5, VCF5 to VCF9. Okay, so think of that as painting the Severn Bridge. Okay, they never, they've got lots of, and what they want to do is move the workloads. So they build a new instance, like get that up and running, and they want to move the workloads from one instance to another. What they do is they use HCX to move between all those different instances. Okay, because HCX gives you the ability to move workloads with zero downtime. Okay, so think of it as vMotion, but you can do it's like vMotion on steroids. You can even do vMotion across the internet if you want, right? And HCX provides you the ability to do that. Okay, so they're the sort of things that you can use HCX for. So as I said, from a rebalancing, you might have in one data center that's running really hot. This could be your on-prem environment, and you want to use OVH or GCVE, as a disaster recovery environment, or I want to use it to move some workloads too while I get some new servers. We need to get some additional budget, to buy those expensive servers with that expensive RAM at the moment. It might be cheaper to run like servers in OVH at the moment, so you can actually use their services. Run the workloads, and we can extend the networks in between your on-prem and OVH or GCVE or whatever. Really easy. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail about what we call network extension and mobility optimized networks very, very briefly. Okay. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Right. So this is the last marketing slide. Realistically, what does this say? It basically says if you've ever has anyone done any migrations from one environment to another, were they quite painful?
Well, we take
there you go, perfect.
except the data center were different and lately like all VMware line in the VMware environment.
So you've answered the question, right? So to do any like large scale migrations from different environments, right, there's an awful lot of planning, right? There's an awful lot of problems, right? And that planning and like actually doing the migrations, and how do you plan to migrate this application and all the dependencies, etc., is quite hard, right? And is very time consuming. And what we tend to see is, right, it takes so long to plan it that actually people lose the will to live and never actually get the migrations done. Okay. And what this slide really says, which is a marketing slide, is HCX makes your life easy, right? It does, right? Because you can migrate VMs, or workloads or applications. You can bundle them in what are called mobility groups. You can bundle them together to migrate the application with zero downtime. So I can pick up an application, all the VMs required with it, and move it in one go, right? So that's realistically what that says. Okay, so you've got an environment, okay, and it could be, a data center, could be an environment that's running old environments. If anyone's running KVM, Hyper-V, you can use HCX to migrate from a KVM environment, OpenStack. You can use it to migrate from Hyper-V, right? So you can pick those VMs up, convert them, right, into a VMDK and then migrate them, okay? So HCX provides that ability to do the conversion as well. And what it does is it basically converts, it picks up your, if you like, the applications or the VMs or the workloads you've got running in your existing environment or your existing data center, and then basically picks them up, does what is required, and squirts them into VCF, okay? So if you have once you've got them in VCF, okay, once you've got them migrated, what you can then do is you can migrate between different VCF instances, yeah, but you can also migrate within different partner managed cloud environments. You can use them to migrate in between your own cloud, provider cloud, OVH, right? So if you need to do balancing or you need to migrate from one service provider to another, you can use HCX to do that, circular move, right? So you can go from GCVE, as I've already said, to OVH, from OVH to whatever, right? It gives you that flexibility of movement and control, right? Any questions on that? No?
And that functionality is within the VCF 9 license.
Yeah. So you can actually use it on VCF 5. Yeah. So if you had older VCF licenses, or even before, if you had HCX, you can do the same migrations previously. So so you can go from from here. If you've got so we have one big customer that, for example, they are currently going to VCF 9 here, okay, but they're running on VCF 5.2 here, and what they do is they use HCX to go from one build, if you like, or one instance to another instance. So it's part of an upgrade. So they build the environment, what they want to use here, this new upgrade, rather than doing an upgrade here, right? Because they don't want to impact the workloads. So they build the environment and then they migrate the workloads to that new environment, okay? And then when there's no workload sitting here, what they then do is upgrade it, okay? And then once they've upgraded it, then they balance the workloads. So it's like, that 7-bridge analogy, that, it's just continually going on, right? Because they're moving workloads and upgrading environments.
I think where we found it really useful was the fact that you could stage the data and do it over relatively low bandwidth when you're migrating between data centers.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into the different methodologies or different methods of doing the migration. Depending on what applications you want to run, you can do it with zero downtime. If you need to convert, there's some downtime required, but you can do it with a reboot. You can do upgrades on changing the IP address, depending what you need to happen in between this environment and that environment. What do you need to happen? There's different strategies, different methods that HCX can deploy to help you do those migrations, right? It hasn't just got one, if you like, tool in its armory. It's a bit like a Swiss Army knife that provides multiple capabilities, multiple features, to help you migrate from one environment to another. Because one application is going to be completely different to a different type of application. Is it runtime? Is it a real-time database, which might be slightly different, to something that's fairly static. Okay, so but you've got that ability to migrate between VCF older environments. But once you're in that VCF environment, you can then very easily migrate workloads between different providers, different environments, different versions of VCF. Okay, so you've got this environment, and I'm just going to say you've got this environment. I've got here legacy data center, right? It could be VCF, right? And down here we've got the different methods or migration methods, that you can use to actually migrate from one environment to another. Okay, and then what we've got is down the bottom we've got two other things. One called mobility groups. So mobility groups are just a way of saying it's a collection of VMs that we want to pick up and move in one go, right? Okay, so when you do a mass migration, you might say, well, what I want to do this weekend is I want to pick up this group of VMs and move that group of VMs, that group of applications, in one go. Okay, and that could be like 150 VMs, 1,000 VMs, but you're going to basically group that of VMs, and there's tools that we can help you do that analysis of what VMs you want to pick up and move. Okay, and then the following weekend I'm going to pick up another group of VMs, and each of those groups is what we call a mobility group. And within a mobility group, you can define each different versions or different methods within that migration window. How do I want to move that individual VM? How do I want to move this group of 100 VMs? You can say, I want to use this migration method, okay? Okay, migration estimation is, okay, we had a point that, across a very slow link, how long does it take? How long is it going to take for me to migrate 100 VMs over this very slow link? Okay, so migration estimation provides, okay, it's going to take me 3 days to move this 1,000 VMs from this environment to that environment. Okay, so it allows you to do the planning that is required to do the migration and to plan and say, how long is it going to take me to get the VMs from this environment to that environment, right? So it allows you to do the planning, okay? And then over on the right-hand side, we've got, and these are all optional things, right? You don't have to use network extension. You don't have to use mobility optimized networking. You don't have to use traffic engineering. They're just things that you can use if it's going to help you during the migration. So network extension is, when you do a migration of a VM, there's things that you need to think about when you do the migration, right? And for example, Sean was saying, okay, I want to create 3 web VMs, okay, as part of a deployment. Okay, now those 3 web VMs might be all on the same layer 2 network, okay, but you might go for resiliency and for business resiliency. What I might need to do is only move 1 VM out of that old environment into the new environment, but leave the two existing web VMs in the old environment. Okay, leave that for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Okay, and then move the remainder 2 VMs once we know it all works. Okay, so network extension allows you to provide like a layer 2 connectivity, and I go into a bit more detail, between your old environment and your new environment, and it uses those network overlay technologies that we've got within NSX, to provide that software overlay network between your old environment and your new environment. Okay, so high availability is obviously if I've got this old environment and this new environment, and I've got half the application running here and half the application running here, I need to ensure that between these 2 environments, that network is high availability. It doesn't have a single point of failure. Okay, right? So within HCX, we can configure what we call diverse routes. So we can go, okay, between these 2 environments using high availability, okay, we can have one path that goes via, I don't know, let's call it cult, like one network provider, and we can go via a different network provider. So we use completely different providers, networks, network infrastructure, and we can actually balance between the 2 and say, and we can have high availability between those 2 different diverse routes. Okay. Okay. So traffic engineering and mobility optimized network, I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but it's when I've got half the application sitting here in the old environment and half the application sitting here, how do I want to steer traffic between the old environment, new environment? How do I want to do it from a business perspective? Okay, how much traffic do I want here? How am I going to steer traffic between the, that half the the VMs that I've migrated? And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Okay, any questions on that? No? Okay. Right, so as I said, you can have older versions of vSphere, say from even not versions that are non-supported, say vSphere 7, which has gone end of support. You can migrate off of that unsupported version, yeah, to VCF 9, we can do the upgrade. So as part of that upgrade, depending on what migration method you use, we can upgrade VM tools, we can upgrade the VMware hardware version as part of the upgrade. You know, so there's lots of things we can do as part of the upgrade to enhance, you know, what you're landing on here. Okay, but obviously, I've also said, if you need to migrate from KVM or Hyper-V, yeah, we can do that. So if you need to repatriate some workloads from OpenStack, you know, from a different hypervisor, you can do. Is everyone aware of the standalone VMware converter? Okay, yeah. So HCX currently supports KVM and Hyper-V. If you want to migrate from a different public cloud instance or version, you know, you can use the standalone VMware converter to do the conversion, get it into a VMware factor, and then use HCX to do the migration, right? Think of it as a two-stage process, but yeah, you can do it, okay? Yeah. Right, so these are the different versions of migrations that you can actually use within HCX to do to move between different environments. And how did you do the migration? And one of the key things that you might want to look at, right, is really this bit here, right, which is the state of the VM that I need to migrate. Okay, so if it says live, right, that means we're basically zero downtime. So I assume we're all happy with the term vMotion and how you actually, you know, and the requirement for vMotion between migrating from one ESX host to another. So if you've got an application that supports vMotion, okay, i.e. zero downtime, it's near enough zero downtime, and there is, you know, even with vMotion, there is a stun time. And in VCF 9, right, that stun time of a vMotion has drastically been reduced to support AI workloads, okay? So even though vMotion is near enough zero downtime, yeah, there is a very, very minute nanosecond, microsecond downtime. Most applications can handle it, but some real-time applications weren't able to. But in VCF 9, that stun time has been reduced, which means we can even support AI workloads as within vMotion. So if it can support vMotion, a standard vMotion, you can use HCX to migrate the VM, right? It's the same technology, right? So you can use HCX to migrate AI workloads from the public cloud onto VCF, okay? So if we work down this list, okay, you've got HCX vMotion, okay? If we run along, right, say that the VM is switched on and running, okay, it uses vMotion to do the migration, right? It's a live migration, and transfer concurrency means how many VMs can I, you know, concurrently migrate from one environment to another. So HCX is a serial copy, okay? Right, so if I've got 100 VMs to migrate, you're going to pick up one and you're going to copy another, right? And it's a serial copy. When it's done that serial copy, yeah, it's going to start the second vMotion, okay? Now, in newer versions of, you know, vCenter and vSphere, you know, vMotion supports up to 8 vMotions concurrently, and this is where we get into HCX vMotion Direct, because HCX vMotion uses what is called the IX appliance within HCX. So the IX appliance is a dummy ESX host, right? So it actually supports currently one vMotion at a time, okay? So it says here 1 per mesh, and within HCX you can have multiple what are called service meshes, and I'll go into that very, very briefly later on. But it's the data plane. How do we actually migrate from one environment to another? There's some appliances that we create that automatically deployed using HCX, and that data plane for those migrations is called the service mesh, okay? And one of those appliances is called the IX appliance, which does the migration. Okay, HCX Assisted vMotion Direct. What a wonderful name that is. Okay, actually, rather than using the IX appliance, it actually uses the ESXi hosts to do the migration itself and uses vMotion. Okay, but it talks directly to the ESXi hosts. So you can see that we can actually do 50 migrations, yeah, concurrently, and we can do a switch over. So that is the vMotion, i.e. cutting over from running here and actually saying the application is now running over here, okay? So we can do 50 concurrent switchovers, right? But that is very dependent on how many ESXi hosts you have, how big your environment is, a whole different things. So then, so there's a big caveat here, right? Hence the star there that says how many can you actually support. That is very dependent on your individual environment and what you're migrating to and what you're migrating from. We then go down to HCX bulk, okay? So you look here, so the VM is switched on when we start. We use host-based replication, which is the same as SOM, right? It's host-based replication. What does that really mean? We're going to copy a VM from one environment to the other. When that copy is complete, what we're going to do is stop the service running at the source site, basically reboot the VM at the destination, and there's going to be a reboot. Okay, so you see here it says a reboot. Okay, but the big advantage is I can schedule when I want that cutover to happen. Okay, and I can copy an awful lot more data ahead of time. Okay, so there's different use cases, but as part of this reboot, if I need to change the IP address, right, of the VM, if I need to upgrade the VM tools, if I need to change the VM hardware, okay, we can use bulk migration to do that. Okay, if I need to change the DNS server, run any post-migration scripts, change anything, as part of that reboot, we can schedule a post-migration script to do some enhancements, right, or change parameters on the VM, individual VMs or whatever, or on all the VMs. Yeah, we can run a script to say, okay, this is what we need to change. We need to change the IP address. We need to change the DHCP server. We need to change DNS, Active Directory, whatever you want to do, you can run those scripts, okay? So cold migration, not really that useful, right? It's for VMs that are powered off, so you can just copy them or back them up or restore away, right? So, yeah, it's for VMs that are powered on, off, okay? So if the VM's off, the application's not going to be running there anyway, right? So there's other ways to do it. Now, the bottom two here were the migration methods that were in the most expensive license of HCX prior to VCF, okay? OS-assisted migration is the way that we actually migrate from Hyper-V and KVM to VCF, okay? So we deploy an agent and it requires a reboot. Actually, it requires two reboots, right? Because we do a conversion and then we do a bulk migration, basically, okay? But you can see that, how many we can actually support. And disks are, because we're migrating from a different environment. So, for example, if we're migrating from Hyper-V, a disk is, you might have a data store that is mapped as your G drive, your F drive, okay? What we're going to do is part of HCX is copy all of that configuration, right, and all the data stores from one environment to the other. So depending on the amount of disks that you have mapped per VM, right, this is what we support when it comes to OS-assisted migration. It's the data stores that are attached to those VMs. Now, the very bottom one, replicated assisted vMotion, or RAV, is what really was the secret sauce of HCX, okay? Now, replicated assisted vMotion is a combination of vMotion and bulk migration. You go, well, what's the value of that? Okay, so let me give you an example. I need to have zero downtime of an application, but I also need to condense the maintenance window that I want to do the migration in. Okay, so I might need to migrate 100 VMs within an hour from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Okay, now if I'm going to migrate using like vMotion, using like only a 1 gig pipe in between these two different environments, okay, I might struggle to copy all the 100 VMs in that 1 hour maintenance window. Okay, so what bulk does, I can say, well, let's schedule and use host-based replication and get the VM copied, replicated, right? And we start the replication on Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks in advance. Okay, we then just replicate the data. Okay, and then once it's there, every 2 hours, right, we check the difference between what is at the source and what is at the destination, and we replicate those two VMs and the difference. When we get to that maintenance window where we want to do the cutover and say, okay, we want to cut over 2 a.m. Saturday morning, right? We don't want to run in that destination data center. We want to run in we want to run in the destination data center. We want to cut over from that source environment, and we want to run the application over here. Okay, what we then do is do a vMotion of the delta, right? So if we've got 99, 98, 90, whatever it is, % of the VM already there, okay, the big advantage is the vMotion, which is a serial copy, and the cutover, okay, we don't need to copy 64 terabytes of the VM, because 63.75 terabytes, right, of the VM is already over there. All we need to do is the last 250 gig, right? So the maintenance window, right, that we need to cut over and migrate all those VMs is drastically reduced and condensed. Okay, so I can migrate, 100 VMs, 1,000 VMs, whatever, in a far shorter time frame using WAV than you can using either of these two, vMotion and HCX assisted vMotion, because 98, 97%, whatever it is, depending on how much churn you get on the VM, okay, can actually like be at the destination before you even start to do the cutover. Okay, but again, it's zero downtime. Okay, because what we do is we get 98% of the VM or 99% of the VM over there, and then we just do the last 1%, 0.5%, whatever it is, using vMotion. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So they're the different ways that you can actually do a migration from one site or one environment to another. Okay. So what have you got? Okay. So you've got the, if you like, the data plane. So you have the HCX manager, you have the vCenter and the NSX manager at the source. You don't need NSX you don't need NSX at the source environment that you're migrating from. You do need NSX at the destination. Okay, these three are basically all called, or I'm going to call them if you like, the management plane. Okay, and it's these appliances that are sometimes called fleet appliances, sometimes called the service mesh when they're all grouped together. These are how you actually do the migration from one environment to another. So here, what you've got is you've got an appliance called the network extension, which extends the network from the source to the destination and creates a layer 2 pipe between the two different environments. You have a WAN optimization, which has gone away in VCF 9, but you've got the IX appliance, which actually does the migration. And you've got what is called the Sentinel Gateway and the Sentinel Data Receiver, which does the conversion between Hyper-V and KVM. So different appliances do different jobs within this, right? But you see, right, each of these are called a fleet appliance, but grouping together, you have them called as a service mesh, all right? But you have what is called like site pairings, both from a management plane and from a data plane perspective between these two environments. Okay? Right, so what's the advantage of network extension and mobility optimized networking, right? So I like to use 3-letter acronyms like everyone else in the industry. So to save me saying mobility optimized networking, if you hear me call it MON, M-O-N, that means mobility optimized networking, right? So if I've got a VM, right, which is, could think of it as a heart, right? We're all happy with the concept of a heartbeat within a cluster, whatever that cluster is, whether it's a Oracle rack or whether it's an SQL server, and there's a heartbeat that is synchronizing the application. Typically, those applications might require a heartbeat network, okay, which is layer 2, right? So I've got this data purchase server, an Oracle rack server sitting over here, and I pick up one of the cluster of a cluster VM sitting here, and I move it over to this new environment, okay? So part of the cluster is sitting over here, part of the cluster is sitting over here. But I need those two VMs to, even though I've picked them up and moved them, right, because I can't pick them up and move them all in one go, right, even if I do vMotion, right, there's going to still be one, like, a time when one's in one environment, one's in the other, okay? So network extension provides me that ability to provide that layer 2 connectivity between these two environments, okay? Now, we use overlay technology, so we can create that network, right? So think of right? So one of the big advantages of using overlay technologies, right? So if I'm running this environment here and I'm using, we've got a really good deal on HP servers and Cisco hardware over here. There's Cisco switching over here, and we're using a VLAN network here, but actually over here we're using Lenovo servers and Arista, right? Because we've got a better deal, right? We can create that network, that layer 2 network between two different vendors, because we abstract the networking just like we abstract the compute, So that's the big advantage, right? I don't need to use the same networking kit here as over here, right, to create that networking, right? Yeah, you can use, layer 2i VPN, right? But we can actually create this within seconds, and it's a little tick box that say, create me a network in between these two environments, which allows, either that heartbeat to go between these two environments, right? So, if I need that layer 2 connectivity, I can do it, Do you see the benefit of having that capability? Creating a network extension is optional. You don't need to use it. It's there if you want to use it. You don't have to use it, So when we talk about high availability, right, so we have two different paths, right? So these can be, go through different providers. We can, push them two different ways, right? So, if one provider takes your network down, we have high availability, So you have that functional resilience and resiliency for your applications, right? While we're doing the migration, right? So MON, What is the big value of MON? So if I'm picking up an application, I'm not going to talk about through a very wordy slide. If you need to pick up an application and move it from one environment to another, if you think about the architecture, here, right, and this could just be we're running VLAN networking at the source environment, and here you've got your physical router that's running on Cisco, Arista, Juniper, Nokia, whatever it is, right? You've got this virtual machine, you've got your first hop gateway running here, so i.e. the gateway for the VLAN, Now, if I pick up a VM and move this VM over here, right, the problem is, right, for me to get access to the gateway, I need to traverse that layer 2 network, get over here to then hit this first hop gateway to get access to the rest of the world, okay? Right, which is, you know, tromboning that traffic from a application standpoint, user experience standpoint. If this is in between, like let's for example use Singapore and Amsterdam as two or wherever, right? We're adding additional latency, so the user experience is going to be suboptimal, okay? Which is you're going to get the application owners going, oh bloody hell, we started doing the migration and the application is performing like a pile of, right? How are we going to resolve it, okay? So, you know, how do you do that, right? And so, you know, if you're migrating a workload to OVH, yeah, how can you do that, right? How do you remove that pain, okay? So what mobility optimized networks says, okay, we're intelligent enough, right, that we know that the VMs have been migrated, right? So, you know, we know that they've actually landed over here, right? We've seen them land. We know they're actually in migration, right? Using vMotion, right? You know, because we're part of that decision to migrate them. What Mon does says, right, if I've got a VM that is sitting on this VLAN that we've migrated and we've got a layer 2 extension to over here. So this app tier here is extended to this app tier here, okay? So layer 2 network, okay? What we actually do is say, right, the VMs that are landed here, rather than using the first hop gateway, right, the Arista, Cisco, Juniper, Nokia, whatever gateway you've got sitting here on the source environment, we can do some fancy things using software-defined networking and say, actually, we've got a router here that can replicate it, right, and do the routing at source, at the destination. So rather than tromboning the traffic over here to hit this router, to then come back over here to hit this VM, okay, we go, well, look, both of the two VMs we want to communicate from an application standpoint are all located in the new destination data center or new destination environment. So what I can do is create, the routing at the destination rather than having it to come over here to do it, okay? Which then enhances user experience, the application while we're doing the migration, yeah? Because we don't have to go across the internet to get back into the old environment to do the routing to come back again, yeah? So while you're doing the migration, it really greatly enhances that user experience, okay? And so, so if you've got different networks, we can do up to 50 different networks. We can do that routing within a service mesh, or we can extend that even a bit further if you need to. Does that make sense? Does that make sense from a user or a user experience point of view? Yeah? Okay? Right, so what happens, right, when half the application is over here and half the application is still residing here? Right, so this is where we can come into what we call traffic engineering, and we can use policy-based routing that says, okay, the VMs that we've actually migrated, what we can do is steer traffic inbound and outbound of this destination, and we can use, right, this is a network term that me and Rich use quite a lot, /32 host-based routes, right? They are more specific routes, so the physical network that sits out here, whether it's Cisco, Arista, Juniper, whoever, right? Because they're more specific routes, are going to go to get to this VM that we resided over here, is going to come back in this route, okay? So as we've migrated the VM, right, steer the traffic over here, okay? The rest of the application that still resides over here is going to come back into this data center, right? But the traffic that we want over here, steer into the new environment. So as we advertise more /32 routes, you might get to that point where actually we've now got 50% of the workload sitting over here on this network, okay? So let's just cut over, right, the routing, the full routing, yeah, over, right? And then you might advertise /32 routes out of here, right? But when we migrate as part of HCX, we can automate this process of advertising those /32 host routes out, right? Which greatly enhanced application availability and user experience. Okay. 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 So, what's the benefit of using HCX, which is software defined, rather than using, like, because you can do that layer 2 networking, you can do those /32 routes. What's the big advantage, right, between using HCX or a physical solution, right? The big advantage, one of the big advantages, right? Okay, if I've got vendor A at the source, right, I don't need to use vendor B at the destination, right? Network vendors have open standards, but a lot of vendors actually tweak the open standard, and we go, well, we use the open standard, but we have this enhancement to it, okay, which stops really the integration between two different vendors, so Arista, Cisco. Yeah, if you try and do EVPN in between the two, yeah, you can, but you need to go down to the lowest common denominator. Yeah, whereas if you're using like an overlay technology, do we care whether you're using Cisco in one environment and Arista in another, Sonic, whatever? We don't care what the network provider is. Okay, it allows you to give you that flexibility, right? Okay. It also tends to have a higher provisioning effort, right? Because you've got to go and configure it, right? When you actually look at HCX, it's really easy to deploy and use. And me and Rich, run experience days, right? And there's a group of us that run them, right? What we do as part of the lab within that for HCX, and you can run that on hands-on labs, and you can do a HCX migration. Yeah, you will see how easy it is to actually even create that layer 2 extension between the two different environments. It's like a little tick box, right? It is that easy, right? Do you need to add complexity? No, it's that business case. Do I need it for the application to have that layer 2 connectivity between the source and destination? Yes, no. If I need it, please configure it for me. If I don't need it, don't configure it. Okay? So, if I have a long span, right, the network team, and here's a question to you. If you request extending layer 2 between two different data centers, do you generally get pushback from your network teams? No? Okay. A lot of organizations do, because network teams don't like extending layer 2 between one data center and another, because there's things that happen, like a horrible thing called like broadcast storms, right? If they cock it up, right? So
I think it depends on each overall architecture, right? So if you're in well-connected data centers, where you're doing it, say, between two micro switches, yeah, it's straightforward. But then if you've got to route, if that traffic's then going over routers, and because you're going over these lines, that adds in another layer component.
Yeah. Right, and so it depends, right? So within availability zones, within a data center, yeah, they might, your network team might say we're going to do it. But if you say, will you extend the network between London and Amsterdam? They might go, no, don't want to do that, right? But you can create that layer 2 network in between, yeah, London, Amsterdam as easy. Right? And we can even create you a 3-point topology. So we could go London, Amsterdam, Singapore, right? So you can stretch the network between London, Amsterdam, and Singapore, right? We can provide that capability, right? Here's a whole loader, because I assume you're going to get a copy of all the slides. You're going to get, here's a whole load of resources. So I talked about hands-on labs. So On the basic HCX lab, you can create the service mesh and the network extension. Here's the link, direct link to create that or to use the hands-on lab. And then to do mobility optimized networking and lab, there's an advanced lab, right? But there's a whole load of links in there, okay? Right, I'll probably hit my time. Any questions? Because you've all been fairly quiet. Yeah?
So it's tricky. How do you feel using HXDR as a migration tool?
So for disaster recovery, as I said, right, that's not going to be the strategy and focus of HCX going forward. So I would advise you against using it, because the capability might be there today, but it's not, the capability is not going to be there going forward, right? Because HCX is going to be for a migration technology rather than disaster recovery. So what HCX used to be able to do is use that host-based replication, which is the same technology as SOM, but HCX enables like a 2-hour synchronization, right? SOM is down to 5 minutes, right? And is going to go even sub, right? Because it's for that disaster recovery use case, not migration. So if you want disaster recovery, disaster avoidance, my recommendation is to use SOM.
Why not use VMware to shoot VMware replication? I mean, it works, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you've got different things, right? But one of the big advantages of SOM is you can actually schedule things. You can do test disaster recovery. So you spin it up in an isolated recovery environment. You can ensure all your disaster recovery scripts. You can spin it up, make sure it works while still leaving your live environment up and running. So that disaster recovery, you can spin it up, you can test it, right? Because one of the, and we're going off the HCX use case, right? But one of the big use cases around disaster, or one of the big pitfalls of disaster recovery is people don't test their DR, right? And it's the frequency of testing that DR plan, right, that fails when someone needs to hit that big red button and go, shit,
I think the trouble is if you test stuff in isolation, it's not realistic, right? So much stuff is interconnected, and if you don't do it all, you don't really, it defeats the object.
Yeah.
It isn't a test, right? So that's what we found. We do it twice a year, and we do everything.
Okay. And so SOM, because when you click the little flag within SOM that says I want to do it as a test, right? It basically spins up a little bubble.
We used to use it.
Okay. So when you use SOM, you fire up a little bubble and you say, okay, spin like do a DR, start everything, run all your scripts, but you're in a little bubble where, think of it as you're in a little enclave, or let's call it a little environment where we can enable things to work, but it doesn't go live. Okay, so you can test it and say, we've got connectivity. All we would need to do is that last final little bit to push the routes out on your physical network, right? So you can do everything, right, up to that last little bit. So you can do the DR tests every day, every week, right, which provides the ability to make sure the scripts work. And you can go, okay, can we test it again and make sure the scripts work today?
I think that really comes down to the nature of our applications, right? But it wouldn't work for us. Like you doing an API or something like that in isolation, they sit here under load balancer and all the rest of it. It wouldn't work.
Okay, you've got to do it in conjunction with everything else. I mean, whether it's networking, stretching of layer 2, you're doing the routing. I mean, ultimately, a lot of it comes down to, I suppose, moving away from a hardware-defined data center, right? But you've got lots of different vendors, lots of different layers. To your point around, you've got to test the whole stack, right? You can't just test one bit.
I think the thing, I guess, having run NSX for so long, you know, having stretched layer 2 in NSX is so easy, and it makes DR really easy.
Right, correct, right? But not everyone is there, right? Right? Not everyone's there, right?
Applications. You can simplify what you're doing in the physical and actually move it into NSX and obviously that abstraction layer. And you could simplify your physical network, the onward connectivity, the load balancer, and everything else. They're testing things like DR, do you know what I mean? It actually should be fairly straightforward, right? But it's not just SRM in isolation, it's everything else that goes with it, right? You need to run. I mean, ultimately H6, DR is not really a solution, right? So you'd have to NSX to be the platform, right? Provide that layer 2 stretch. So when you invoke DR, actually the workloads move, but actually the networking follows the workload, right? So they're sitting in the same network, not having to update IP addresses, DNS records, firewall policy, load balancing config, like it's all done because it's already there. And the policy follows the virtual machine events.
Any other questions?
Hey? Direction. What's that?
Yeah.
Right.